Hi, everyone. Welcome to Art School Live. I am your host this week, Kari Stober. Eric is traveling in New York City this week, so I have the pleasure of being your host this week. And I'm very excited for the lineup we have this week. Today we have Nigel Sutcliffe. I said that right. I've been saying it wrong all week. So excited for Nigel to come on board today. He is going to be painting in acrylic gouache for us. And let's chat with Nigel. Hi, Nigel. How are you?
Hi, Kari. I'm good. How are you?
Great. Where are you calling in from?
I am on the west coast of Canada on Vancouver Island.
Oh, very cool. I have never been to Canada, but I have always wanted to go. I hear it's beautiful up there.
Yeah, it's very picturesque.
Nice. What are you going to be sharing with us today, Nigel?
Well, I have a 6x8 painting that I'm going to show you, and I'm also going to show you my reference photos. So I'll show you all the way from choosing a reference photo to the finished painting.
Oh, that's great. I was thinking about that the other day. I have such a hard time. I love taking photos and I see things and I'm like, oh, this is so pretty. But then I go to paint it and I'm like, it doesn't translate as well when you actually paint it from the photo. So I'm excited to see how you navigate the choosing of your reference photos. That's going to be valuable information.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, let's go ahead and get this show started and we'll let Nigel take it away.
It's Art School Live with Eric Rhodes. Now, here's your host, Eric Rhodes.
Kari Stober, welcome to Art School Live. As you can see, I am not Eric Rhodes. He is traveling again this week, so I am your host all week long. Super excited for this week. Today we have with us Nigel Sutcliffe. He is going to be painting in acrylic gouache, and he is going to show us how to paint light with a limited palette. He's going to talk through his reference photos and show us start to finish how he goes through his process, and I am super excited for it. So let's go ahead and let Nigel take it away.
Okay. Can you see that clearly?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to look through the reference photos just so you get an idea of what I'm looking for when I'm out there doing the first stage of painting, which is collecting your reference. So there's some key things that are going to catch my eye. I'm looking for interesting color relationships. I'm looking for a variety of shapes, ideally overlapping shapes of different sizes. I'm looking for a unique composition, something I haven't tried before, and some interesting patterns of light and shadow. And I think this one here shows all of those. It has this great path that leads you through the image. It has this wonderful tree that splits off into multiple trunks, and you have this light coming through the tree canopy and these really vibrant greens. And this one, yeah, I love the light coming through the trees here and this wave of light across the snow, and you have these strong verticals that are grounding you, and then this wave at the bottom. So you've got this rigid and then flowy pattern of light at the bottom. And I'll just say a few things about each one because we will get to the demo, and I'll make sure that I get all the way through the demo to the finished painting. This one is a study on atmospheric perspective. So I really wanted to practice mixing those greens as they go from these vibrant greens in the foreground and then drop off to gray and then eventually into blues.
Yeah, that's always a challenge for me. Where was this picture taken?
This is on top of Mount Aaron, so it's half an hour from my house.
Oh, very cool. You are so lucky to live there.
I know.
I thought I was lucky living next to the Rocky Mountains, but they don't look like that.
Wherever I turn, there's something to paint. It's a great place to live. So yeah, in this one also the shapes, the overlapping giant rocky, craggy shapes drew me into that one. This one is zoomed out, so the crop on this one is right here.
Oh, how interesting.
If I go back, yeah, it doesn't look like much from there, and then cropping it correctly is half the battle.
Yeah.
And I really liked this big triangle wedge at the bottom, and then you have these great tree shapes, these silhouettes of the trees, and then different layers where you have the hillside and then the far mountain, all with some nice light and shadow. This is a creek not too far away from my place, and I like the light on the mossy, ferny area on the upper left-hand side, and you have this fallen tree that's directing your eye down to that area. And then you have these vertical trees that are pointing to that area as well. And you also have the reflection of the trees in the water guiding your eye up. So I think there's a lot of potential with something like that. And that's a spot that could produce an entire series of work. This is one of my favorites. This is up on Mount Washington. And you've kind of got a composition here where it's split in half, and you have shadow on the bottom, light on the top, but you have a pathway that goes from the bottom right, weaves through the trees, and eventually ends up at the cabin, which is our focal point. And the cabin, being that orangey brown, contrasts really nicely with the blue of the shadows. And now I have one of my paintings I did recently and the reference photo below. And I just wanted to talk about how I'm simplifying the shapes, because if you're painting something, especially ferns, it's very, very complicated, and you need to simplify to get your point across quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, I have a massive problem with getting lost in the detail and then feeling like I need to put in like every small like stroke of fur or leaf or anything. So that's awesome.
Yeah. So just my recommendation would be to leave that, any amount of fine detail, leave it for the focal point. And then in the background of this one, it's very simplified and big blocky shapes. And I push the warm colors in the background of this to contrast against the cool colors of the truck and the ferns in the foreground. And this is a combination of two of my favorite things, old vintage cars and the West Coast forest. This is a good example of how I simplify the shapes. You can see how complex the trees on the right-hand side are.
Yes.
And then on the left, I've just taken one area and generalized that down to one big brush stroke and just kept it as simple as possible, because it's more about describing the light than it is about describing the detail. And this was a quick study of the fall colors. This one's more about the palette, because that's the palette I'll be using today. It's a diarylid yellow, burnt sienna, and peacock blue.
Ooh, that sounds like a nice blue that I need to have.
Yeah.
When you do your studies like this, do you always do a color wheel like that when you're working on your studies, or is that just for our benefit today?
Most of the time I will do a color wheel, and I'll talk about that. I have it off to the side here.
Oh, perfect.
I'll talk about how I navigate around the color wheel and why I do those, because they're a useful little reference. And this is the scene we'll be doing today. So the top study is a 3x4 inch using secondary colors. So instead of primaries, your traditional red, yellow, blue, I'm using orange, green, and purple. And then for the study on the bottom, I'm using what I call my sunset palette, which is a deep yellow, a violet, and a burnt sienna. And I'll explain how I use that and translate the colors in my mind because I'm using the same reference photo when I change the colors. And here is the original reference photo before I cropped it. It didn't look like too much, and half the battle is cropping, like I mentioned before. And that's it cropped down. And I like this road that leads you through the composition, and then you have this light coming from the left-hand side, creating kind of a cross in the middle, and then the focal point being this lit up area on the right-hand side with the sign and the telephone pole. And there is an example. This is not something I do every time, but this is just so you can see how I'm simplifying the reference photo in my mind. So you can see how I've described edges and I have overlapping forms. So all the way back, I'm thinking about this tree sits in front of this one and this bush, and these plants are coming up and creating a silhouette against this light. So that's sort of an insight into what's going on in my mind when I'm painting. Usually I'll do a much looser sketch. So that's it for the slideshow. Do you have any questions, or does anyone have any questions before I switch over?
I just want to take the time to thank you for all the preparation you did today. Like, this is awesome having you walk us through this preparation process. I've realized just recently, like, how much of painting is actually the preparation process. And I am so impatient. I tend to skip over that. So seeing how you are preparing before we're actually going to jump into painting today is really, really helpful. Thank you.
I find it's the best way to not get lost in a painting, and my mind is very scattered a lot of the time. So doing all this prep work really, really helps, especially if you're doing a series of work, because you have a solid foundation to work off of and you won't get lost. So let's switch over there. Hopefully that's framed nicely.
Yes.
Okay. So this is the sketch transferred onto some toned tan paper, and I transfer it with carbon paper. So the sketch was done on my iPad. There we go.
Okay, so you sketched on an iPad and then printed it onto the carbon paper?
I printed it onto regular printer paper, and then I use the carbon paper to transfer it. Because if I'm doing a series of work, I need to have the exact same composition and sketch over and over again. So that just saves time. And then I will do, before I do a color painting, I'll do one in black and white. So a small value study, just so I can get a good idea of what my value structure is going to be. Because if I get the values correct in my color version, then I can play with the color. I don't have to worry about color picking from the reference photo.
Okay. And did you, so someone just asked, so with all of this preparation you're doing with, you know, your sketching and adjusting the reference photos, do you also do a location study when you're there?
If I can. I paint on location probably 20% of the time.
Okay.
In 2020, I did a big plein air show. That's where I really got into color and understanding how important it is to paint on location to see the real colors, because when you take a photo, the colors change. Your camera is processing it, and it'll flatten certain areas or overexpose certain areas.
Right.
So definitely painting on location has a massive benefit, but it's not always possible. So the majority of the time I'll work from a reference. It's also nice to sit down in the studio and not be standing out in the rain or whatever
well,
it may be.
I live off of a highway, so I have a tendency to just stop and take quick photos when I see something cool. So it's kind of refreshing that I don't have to go out and stand by the highway to try and paint it.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the color wheel for this palette. And I do these color wheels just to give me a good idea of the range that I'm working with, because I'm thinking about the light interacting with the objects. So if I'm thinking of the sunlight, this is late in the afternoon. The sunlight is a warm light. And if I have a green tree, I'll turn my wheel. So if my tree is this color, the sunlight's going to pull it in this direction. So I know my tree in the sun will need to be somewhere in this range. And when it's in the shadow, it's lit by the ambient light of the sky, that blue ambient light. So it's going to pull the local color of the tree in this direction.
Okay, that's very smart. I come from a pastel background where you just, you know, you pick the colors you want. So I'm learning color mixing, and this is very, very helpful because I would just like randomly mix different colors for shadows and lights. So color harmony here is very important.
Yeah, and having a plan so you don't get lost and you're not just mixing randomly on your palette over and
That's
over again
100% what I'm doing.
and getting frustrated.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So with this, you can't really get lost because you're just picking out your closest match to whatever you're seeing in the reference photo. And there's a lot of greens in this one. So this palette gives me, because this peacock blue is a phthalo green, excuse me, and a phthalo blue. So I've got to have some water. So it gives me some great greens when mixed with this yellow. Okay, so I'll put that off to the side and we'll start the block in. And I do have this painting set up in 3 different stages. I've taken it to the end of the block in stage, so you will get to see the whole process. I've got one that's near the end, I've got one that's totally blocked in, and I have this one. So we'll spend maybe 10 minutes on this, get it to whatever we can, and then I'll bring in the other stage where it's ready for the second layer. And then when we've got about 5 minutes left, I'll bring in the final painting and we'll do the final details.
Awesome. Would you mind repeating your colors again?
Yeah, I have a deep yellow, which is 𝗣𝗶𝗵𝗵. I have a burnt sienna and a peacock blue, which is basically phthalo blue mixed with phthalo green. So it's a low chroma red, so low intensity red, a fairly intense yellow, and a very, very intense blue. And I've pre-mixed a few colors here, some secondary, so I've got a few greens to choose from, warm to cool, and then I have some oranges. And the peacock blue and burnt sienna makes a fairly grayed out neutral, which will be perfect for our road.
Awesome. And for those of you watching, Nigel is using acrylic gouache, which we had a discussion beforehand, whether it was gouache or whether it was acrylic, and it's gouache with acrylic polymer. So it's acrylic, but dries like gouache.
Yes, it'll dry looking like gouache, but it's actually basically a flat matte acrylic. So I'm mixing a color for my sky first. I'm going to start right in the background, and I need some peacock blue, but it's very intense, so I will take some burnt sienna, just a little bit to bring that down. And then I don't want to follow my sketch too closely because I don't want it to end up like a paint by numbers sort of thing. But I still want to, well, I spent all that time describing where those things are, so I want to be a little bit careful. And I've taped around the edge so I can go over the edge. I don't have to worry about keeping a close
fine line.
A fine line, yeah. So now that sky's done, that's all I need. And I'm going to move on to these distant hills. I don't know if you can see back in here, there are some distant hills. So it's very, very close to the sky color, but a little bit darker. So again, I'll add some burnt sienna in there and some peacock blue, maybe some of this neutral mix. And I'm just using a number 10 flat brush.
I love that color.
Yeah, it's perfect for those distant hills.
Do you always tone your canvas with, or your paper before working? Do you typically use a complementary color, or does it depend on the scene and kind of what mood you're trying to depict?
Yeah, exactly. It depends what mood I'm trying to go for. And in this one, it's all about this light coming across the road and lighting up here. So I want this warm color to be underneath all of the brushwork, and it will pop through in those little areas that are not covered. So it'll unify the whole thing, and it starts you off, especially if you're painting over a white surface. This is a toned tan surface to begin with, but if you're painting over a white surface, getting that tone down gets rid of that intimidating, glaring white, and it gives you a nice starting point for setting the mood for your piece. So I'm going to move on to those far trees. So a cool green, and I want it to be fairly light and not that intense. And after that, I'll start to move around, and I'll block in this foreground and start to establish some color relationships. And this is a point where I would check on my value study just to see if the value is close to what I want. And it's looking fairly close. So I'll block that in. And I'm not worried about any detail at this stage. This is just blocking in the colors to establish the color relationships and the value relationships. So I don't have to be too precious about it. And this is where I'll paint over these telephone poles and all of that stuff. I don't need that right now. That's something, smaller shapes I will come back.
It doesn't stress you out painting over them even though they're in your sketch?
No, because I know they're there. I will come back to those in a later stage when I start to work on smaller shapes.
It would stress me out. If I drew them in there, I would be painting around them.
Well, you don't want to tighten up too much, especially in the block-in stage.
Oh, that's definitely my problem for sure. Okay.
So now I've added a little more intensity to the green as it's coming further forward in the image. And I've just got a tub of water up here above my palette. So I'll wash in between. And a lot of people ask me how much water I use. It's really very little. I just have enough water on the brush so that the paint flows smoothly. And I've got to keep an eye on the time. When we get to about 30 minutes, I'll switch to the next stage.
Okay.
So now I'm going to jump to this foreground tree, which is quite dark. Grab my value study again. This one right here. So I'm going to use this dark neutral green that was mixed with all three. These two to get it to a neutral, and then a little bit of yellow to add some green to it. And then you can start to see, because we finally got some overlapping color there, that we've got the value structure starting to take shape. And you have to remember that at this stage, it looks like nothing. And you have to push through that and not be frustrated that it looks like nothing. I think most paintings get abandoned halfway through this stage or part way into the second layer because people don't trust their process. But if you have a process that you trust in and you know it's going to work out in the end, it takes a lot of the stress out of the entire thing and makes it a lot more enjoyable.
Right. So Jadar's asking, if you have very little time, which of these steps would you consider to be the least important and you could skip?
I wouldn't skip any of them.
Well, there's your answer.
Yeah, I don't think you shouldn't be thinking of how can I make this faster and skip if you're doing this kind of work, because it's all about having a good process that you trust, and however long it takes is however long it takes. If you are trying to do a very quick study, I don't pre-mix my colors. I would do a very quick sketch just showing basic shapes. Say I'm on location and I have half an hour. I just go, spend a minute on the sketch and then just start going, mixing intuitively. But if you're in the studio and you have time, spend the time, make sure you go through it and do the best job you can. That's how I do it anyway. I don't want to tell you how to paint, but I kind of do. Okay, so you got some of these trees in the midground here. And there's some light coming across from the left. So they're going to be hitting these trees. And then there's a cool side. Put that in there. And I'll paint over those telephone poles. I'm trying not to be too precious about it. And this is where you can also shift the hue. And by that, I mean, start to lean one way or the other. You don't have to do what you see in the reference photo. You could start shifting into oranges or shifting further into blues. At this stage, you can really experiment as long as you're following your value study and it all makes sense
Mm-hmm.
in terms of values. You can get away with shifting those colors and just seeing what happens. And that's where a lot of interesting things happen, where you discover that, oh, I never thought of putting that orange in there, but that really works. Get rid of that telephone pole. Okay, about 5 more minutes on this. Are there any other questions that I can answer while
No,
I'm going?
I've been answering most of the questions. It's stuff that you've mentioned before, so I've been answering them as they come in. You are doing a very good job of explaining your process. So I always say the better the instructor, the fewer the questions.
Oh, okay, excellent. That's good to hear.
One question we did have a little earlier is, are you self-taught? Did you study with anyone in particular? Is there any artists that really inspired you?
Well, I went to the University of Manitoba, which is in central Canada, and I did a fine arts degree there.
Oh,
But
awesome.
I did not do any painting there. I did drawing and graphic design. So I had to teach myself how to paint later on, and that started about 7 years ago.
Very cool.
And artists that inspire me, James Gurney is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
His book, can I mention books? I don't know. People will know his books.
Yeah, everyone
His
knows,
books are fantastic. And
or at least I assume everyone knows who he is.
yeah, it's amazing. Does great work with gouache and casein.
What's the difference between gouache and casein?
Casein is it's got some sort of milk-based binder, from what I understand. I haven't used it, but gouache has gum arabic.
Okay, and then acrylic gouache has the acrylic polymer binder. So
Yes.
similar, they're all similar in properties with the exception of what binds them.
Yeah, but they all have the same pigments in them.
Right.
So the binder is what changes. Just like oil paints are the same pigments as acrylics, as far as I understand. It's just the binder is linseed oil instead of an acrylic polymer. So now I'm going to, since we just have a few minutes left on this block in before I switch to the second layer, I'm going to block in this road. So I'll get a bigger flat brush because I want to cover a bigger area. I'm going to add a little white to my neutral mix over here, and that reveals that it's not so neutral. Oh, you can't really see that. So there's a lot of blue in there. I want to add some red to tone it down. And then looking at my value study, it's looking fairly close. And I also have this little value finder, so I can put my paint on there and see where my value is sitting. So I check that a lot. You can see all the little paint marks all over it.
Yeah.
All right. So this road is facing, it's one of these upward facing planes. So it's facing the sky and it's in shadow. So it's going to receive a blue influence from the sky. So it's slightly shifting towards blue in this gray. But you can play with that, and you could add in, and we will later on add in reflected light, because there's going to be light bouncing around all over the place in this scene. And if you're there in person, you might see some reds and some greens and some oranges in the shadows. Okay, I'm just going to quickly do this so we can stay on time. I'll put in the light coming across the road, and then we'll switch to the second layer. So for the light coming across the road, I want, because it's influenced by the warm light of the sun, I want to mix up a very light, warm color. And I'm going fairly thin with the paint, just for the block in. But now you start to get a sense that there's some light coming across there. And as soon as you start putting the light on some of these forms, and if the telephone pole were there, if you had it on the side of that, you start to get a sense of where the light's coming from. So that's it for the block in. In reality, I would take it all the way and go through all the shapes, but for the sake of time, we'll move into block in complete through the magic of cinema. And now that I have everything blocked in, I can start to think about those smaller shapes like the telephone poles, and there's some road signs that I'd like to put in there. There are some, where's the road sign? Right there. There are some branches hanging down here. There's this signpost here. There's all kinds of things that I could put in, and it's all about not going too far, but putting enough in to give some interest. We've already established a good idea of the light and shadow, so now we can start to have a bit more fun. And I will start with adding in the sign that goes here. And that is going to be a bluish neutral gray. Oh, it's too light. There's no questions? I thought there'd be lots of questions.
Well, like I said, you're doing a very good job explaining your process and the decisions you're making as you go. So we're getting insights in your mind before we even have a question.
Oh, okay. I should talk less. I don't know. Okay, I'm going to use a flat brush and go block in that sign shape. And by putting in all these man-made objects like this sign and the telephone poles, you get a contrast between the hard-edged man-made things and the soft organic shapes of the trees and the bushes. And something I didn't mention, I've actually changed, this was a telephone pole in the reference photo, and I've changed it to a tree trunk because I thought that would be more interesting, and I've kind of curved it across. So you don't have to stick to what you're seeing in your reference photo. You can experiment and have fun with it. And I think that adds a bit more interest to it. You could also have a figure here. You could turn it into a bus stop, have somebody waiting at the bus stop, and this is a perfect focal point for that. But we're not doing that right now. That's the kind of thing I get carried away with, and I'll spend hours and hours thinking of ideas like that. So I'm going to put it in, there's a stop sign there, and a yellow school sign, school zone sign. When we get to, can you give me a heads up when we get to a couple minutes left?
Yes.
And then I'll just switch to the other painting to do the final details.
Yeah, we've got about 20 minutes so far.
20 minutes left?
Mm-hmm. In the whole, yeah, in the whole thing.
Okay. So I have a trick for putting in any straight edge thing or any smooth curves. I have this bendy ruler, which is great because I can place it down exactly where I like it, where I need it. And then say it's about right there. Then I can mix up my color that I need for my telephone pole. Because if you're trying to paint this freehand, it's going to look fairly wonky, which is fine. But if you want something that's got more of a hard edge, that works really well for it.
Nigel, do you paint exclusively in acrylic gouache, or do you use any other mediums too?
I use Acryla-Gouache for pieces up to about 8x10. And then after that, I would switch to regular acrylic paint. I have used oils and I've used gouache before, but I find the acrylic gouache is best suited to the process that I like to do. I can layer it, and I don't have to worry about it reactivating anything underneath. And it also doesn't need to be varnished at the end, which is nice. I'm not hating on gouache. I know gouache people will start coming after me. I like gouache as well. I'm just not as good at painting with gouache, I think. This just fits the process that I like to do. Okay. Put the cross on this here. I've actually gone too high on that telephone pole. So with this, you can, like I was saying, you can layer it as far as you want, and it's never going to reactivate what's underneath. So you can get really nice graphic shapes. I need to wait for that to dry to touch it up. You can get really nice graphic hard edge shapes, but that is a downside as well, because you will get a lot of hard edges all over the place. Whereas if you're using regular gouache, you can blend the edges.
Blend it a little bit, yeah. Do you ever get cracking with your acrylic gouache?
Yeah, you have to be careful about how thick you go. If you put it on really thick, you will end up with a lot of cracking. So I'd like to work in thin layers and build it up as I go. It's not the same as, from my experience, it's not the same as using like a heavy body acrylic where you could put it on really thick. Okay, what should I do next? I'm going to put some highlights on those telephone poles. So I'm mixing some warm, kind of shifting into brown, warm browns, and getting that light across here. Should use my special tool. There we go. And that helps to sell the idea that where the light's coming from. And then I'm going to start adding in some reflected light or bounce light, where in the shadows you've got all of these greens, and light is going to be coming off of those in a very dull way, in a subtle way, and you could get away with putting some greens in the road here, and you could shift the hue any direction you want. You could put, I can see in the reference photo there's a few reds, so there's some dirt in here, so you could experiment and add some interest to the shadows that way. Just test the value. We'll shift it a little warmer where the light is. Add a little green. And we don't have this giant blue mass. You can break that shape up a little.
Yeah, that looks nice.
bring some to the back here. It is very hard to talk and paint at the same time.
I have found that with a lot of artists. It's like left brain, right brain.
Yeah, trying to do everything at once. There is a yellow pole back here that I'm going to put in. I'm just looking for those smaller shapes. And I just realized the reference photo is not on the screen. Sorry about that. There is a yellow pole back here. I'm not sure if you can see it on that small thumbnail. So I'm going to block that in right there. And what else should I do? I'm going to lighten those the hills in the distance there. They're looking a bit too dark. This stage, the second layer, I'm just darting all over the place and just analyzing the whole image, seeing what needs to be done, what I like, what I don't like. Sometimes I'll make notes. I'll stand back and look at it and see what's working and what isn't. This is going too green. I'm going to start that mix again. That's what I mean. I'm having trouble thinking about what I'm doing while I'm trying to talk about it. So I want to start with a blue. I need to tone it down. And I need to lighten it. Put it over here. There we go. Sometimes it takes a while to get what you want. That's looking better. Okay, now some things I could look at putting in are some details over on this side. There are a lot of little flowers up in the trees here, so that could be nice to add in. There's a fence post right here. There's all this dirt against the edge of the road. Right now, I've got a subtle suggestion of that, but I can push that a little further. So I'll go in there. I want to make sure these flowers aren't too bright. I'll go in there with a cool greeny blue and just suggest a few of them. It's too intense. That phthalo green and blue is so powerful. There we go. So just dot a few of those in. So I'm just going through the whole thing thinking about simple shapes. I'm not trying to paint little flowers. I'm just putting in dots to suggest those flowers. And I do that with everything until it looks like it's done. I'll work on that dirt on the edge of the road. And bring it out here a little. Just break up that edge because I have this line that goes all the way down. I want to break that up a little bit. And then on the other side as well. And I'll bring in some of this. If I look back at my sketch and those overlapping shapes, I want to make sure that I'm getting this reading properly. So So I'll bring in some of those shapes.
We've got about 10 minutes left.
Okay.
Someone is asking, are you insistent on covering up all the underlying yellow color, or do you use it as an element if it is popping out here and there?
Well, I'll definitely use it as an element. I'm not worried about covering it up. It would be ideal if it shone through a little bit and it was in the little gaps between the brush strokes. But sometimes you end up covering it all up, and this is very opaque. These Acryla-Gouache paints are very opaque, so it can cover what's underneath very quickly. So right now I'm going to start refining the light that's cast across the road for a few minutes, and then we'll skip to the final stage. Let's warm that up. I don't want to put straight white in there. I want to make sure it's about a value of 8 or 9 on a scale of 1 to 10. And then on the edge of those lit up areas, you can shift the hue to have this transition. So I'll put a little burnt sienna on the edge of that. There's also part of this fence in the background that's lit up. So I'll put some on there, right here. And there was a fence post over here that I just remembered about.
So Sandra is asking, when you are pulling color from your source puddles into what you're mixing, it doesn't look like you're contaminating your source pile. How are you doing that?
Say that again?
So she's watching you as you're mixing colors, and you're mixing a color, and then you go to your source pile and you pull out color to mix into your puddle, but it doesn't look like you're contaminating the source pile at the top. So how are you pulling that color without contaminating it?
That's a good question. I hadn't even paid attention to that, but yeah, it's not getting very mixed in up there. I always pull from the bottom of the pile. It's on a slight angle, so it's kind of pouring down. So if it isn't contaminated, it's probably covering over anything that's contaminated. I don't worry too much about that. Most of the mixes are going to contain all 3 primaries anyway.
Oh,
So,
yeah, that's right.
A little bit of mixing in there is fine. And if you are worried about it, you could use a palette knife. I'm not sure where my palette knife is going. But if I were preparing myself for a bigger painting, I would use a palette knife and mix most of my colors out on the palette so I don't have to dip into everything.
Gotcha.
Or not very often. Yeah. Yeah, so we're at about 12 minutes left?
We are at 5 minutes for you.
5 minutes. Okay.
That last 5 minutes went by really fast, didn't it?
Yes. I'm going to quickly put in some wires on the telephone poles, and then we'll switch to the final stage. So this is where it starts to feel like it's got some life to it.
Yeah.
There's a light there. Sometimes it's better to move faster. And once you start putting in these smaller shapes, it starts to feel like you're actually there. You get the sense of the place. So maybe I'll put one more thing. There is a sign over here. Maybe we'll stop there for that. So I would just continue to refine the smaller shapes and get it very close to the end. And then you would end up with something that looks like this.
Very cool.
So now I've gone through, I've refined everything down to smaller shapes. I've suggested some of those branches up here. Ooh, I'm going to turn the reference photo off. I've suggested a few of those branches that were up there. And the only thing left to do on this one is to put in some better highlights on these telephone poles and some better highlights on the phone lines. I'm going to use this burnt sienna and deep yellow to do that. Just make that a little bit bigger. By better, I just mean I'm defining the shape a little more. And then same thing on these phone lines where they're picking up the sunlight as it's glinting across. Maybe on top of this light as well. So that's about as far as I would go with a small study like that. And that now gives me a jumping off point. If I like that palette and I like the colors and the way the study turned out, I could then blow that up to a 30 by 40 inch painting.
Wow, that's a big jump.
That's about as big as I would go, but that's the same ratio.
Yeah.
And if I find a composition and a scene that I really like, that is what I've done in the past. And we have a couple minutes left. I'll just talk about switching to other palettes and how to navigate that, because I know a lot of people are asking questions about that. So here's some other color wheels that you could use. These are completely different colors, not following primary colors anymore, but you can follow the same principle. So you could use this, in this one it's an olive green, a deep violet, and a luminous red. So if you think about your light source being a red or warm red like this, you can pull your colors in that direction. And you think of your ambient skylight as your deep violet, you can pull colors in that direction. The exact same way we did in this study using this wheel. Then you'll get a completely different feeling in your painting. And a completely different, with a completely different color palette. And I have a few examples if we have time.
Yeah, you've got a couple more minutes.
Okay. So I've done some blocks here, and this is from my beginner course. This was using a split primary palette, so warm and cool primaries. And I have a board here showing that. So there's the warm and cool primary wheels. And that's what you get if you've tried to paint it fairly closely matching from life. And then this is painting the same thing using my sunset palette that I talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So you're using the same color theory and painting exactly the same way, and you get a completely different look and feeling. And then this is using a low chroma palette. And this one was, I write the names of the paints on the back.
Oh, that's
smalt.
Smart.
It's a smalt blue, yellow oxide, and burnt sienna toned with yellow oxide.
That's really cool.
Call that my neutral triadic. So that's my entire process, from starting out, figuring out what your reference photo is going to be, simplifying it with a sketch, doing a value study, and then the final painting.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nigel. This, I've got to echo what they've put in the chat. You have been so unbelievably prepared for today, and it's so helpful and just insightful. And you just did a fantastic job instructing us today. This was really, really amazing.
Oh, that's amazing to hear. Thank you. That's a relief.
Yeah, we are going to drop Nigel's website in the chat. Be sure to check it out. He does have some online courses he does. you definitely want to take advantage of that. That's pretty awesome. Thank you, Nigel, so much. And I hope you guys all enjoyed today's demo. And if you didn't, you just shouldn't come back anymore because it was one of the best ones. So you definitely don't want to miss this one. You're going to want to watch the replay for sure. And for everyone watching today, we have a free gift. We have 11 reasons why acrylic is right for you. And I know today wasn't exactly acrylic, but it's acrylic gouache, which has similar properties. So it applies to you as well. You can check that out at acryliclive.com/ebook. And then we also have Acrylic Live coming up in March. It's 4 days of all kinds of amazing artists that are going to come in, share their secrets, share their instruction, just like Nigel did, just give you that inspiration you need. And it's our goal to always give you the tools that you need to help you increase your painting ability, to help you grow as an artist. And so you're not going to want to miss this. March 25th through 27th, we've got Essentials Day on the 24th, so you can sign up at acryliclive.com. As always, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on amazing content like today's demo. You can do that on YouTube. You can hit that subscribe bell, and then you can also follow Eric on Instagram. He's at 𝗟𝗏𝗺𝗏. And I thank you guys all so much for joining us today. Come back tomorrow. We are going to have Spanish artist 𝗟𝗏𝗺𝗄𝗧 joining us for an oil demo, and you're not going to want to miss that. So I'll see you guys all tomorrow. Bye.